TV trash. It is a scientific fact that anything becomes infinitely cooler just by adding the words, "in outer space." Actually, no, but that's damn sure what cartoon creators seemed to think back in the 1970s. This one is gonna require a lot of setup and backstory. 1970 was pretty much the year when Hanna-Barbera began its unfortunate reputation of just rehashing everything. And it pretty much started with a show that was not only their first shot at reusing the concept from their most successful cartoon series to that point, but one that used licensed characters as well. Josie and the Pussycats was based off the creations of Dan DeCarlo, who in 1962 had his characters, led by Josie McCoy, approved by the makers of Archie comics to basically be gender-flipped versions of the original Archie gang. Yeah, let's be thankful Reddit didn't exist in the 60s. Josie and her friends actually didn't create their band until 1969, and it was actually done so in order to adapt the comic into an animated series. Which kind of makes it more strange that the cartoon went in a completely different direction as the comics, right down to some of the new characters they created being vastly different in both versions. Now, to be fair, the comic characters by then were not adverse to being in crazy settings. For a few years, their cat mascot Sebastian had magic powers, and Bill and Joe had wanted a show about musicians getting into crazy adventures from the beginning, as I'll get to later. But even still, the blatancy of this being a Scooby knockoff with characters HB didn't even create is just unreal. Let me put it this way. I could have made a review of the first Josie and the Pussycats cartoon itself for how off the rails it could get. The first episode of that series has Josie and her friends getting captured by the actual descendant of Captain Nemo, meshed with Ra's al Ghul and the Phantom of the Opera. But no, I decided instead to go after the second Josie cartoon from 1972, where they put all of the main characters into an out-of-control rocket ship and sent them into the final frontier. How long did you just leave this video paused so you could try to process what I just said? Oh yes, people. All those bat-insane cartoons that put the likes of Yogi Bear, Casper the Friendly Ghost, The Partridge Family, Happy Days, and Gilligan's Island into sci-fi settings that made no sense, it all started with this thing. If that wasn't enough to scare you all back into your bunkers, let's get into Josie and the Pussycats in outer space! So we at least are shown how the characters got themselves trapped into outer space in the first 5 seconds of the intro without a long exposition dump. It's not a good explanation, but I'll take what I can get. It seems the band was doing a photo op for a rocket launch, and Black Betty here accidentally shoved everyone into the rocket and set it off for launch. Geez, even in the 70s the media was making NASA look bad. So the first actual episode begins with, "Oh, good night, I gotta play the clip, don't I?"
Pooh, a man, he flies like a moron. Dun.
Now, let's get this out of the way. Any comparisons I will be making with this cartoon will be just to the Josie and the Pussycats comics and not the 2001 movie, because 1, the movie came out nearly 30 years after the cartoon, so comparisons there seem moot, and 2, I never really watched the movie anyway. So let's get the characters out of the way here. We of course have the band's front woman Josie and her friends, the drummer Melody and bass guitarist Valerie. Oh, I'm sorry, she plays the tambourines in the cartoons. Outside of that, these characters' personas are pretty much the same as in the comics. Ditto for Alexandra, who is the complainer of the group. She's only around because she's the twin sister of the band's manager, and she pretty much does nothing but grumble and get everyone into trouble, because even back then, cartoons had to have that trope. But then we get into Alexandra's brother, Alexander. In the comics, he's pretty much the same type of troublemaker as his sister. A spoiled, bratty rich kid who thinks he's smarter than everyone else and is around just because he has the cash to finance the band. Basically a male version of Veronica Lodge. In the cartoons...
Slow us down! Slow us down! We're safe! We're safe! It may not be Earth, but I love it, I love it.
Yeah, there's no getting around it. He's Shaggy. They turned him into Norville freaking Shaggy Rogers. For frack's sake, he's even voiced by Casey Kasem. And then we have the band's roadie and Josie's love interest, Alan. In the comics, he was a goofball himbo. Here, yeah, he's Fred, ascot and everything. Okay, so he's still a himbo, but Bill and Joe had to have him turned into their himbo. Okay, maybe calling him a himbo isn't really fair, because he's apparently smart enough to figure out how to fly the rocket! This is a guy whose primary job in the comics was lugging the band instruments around. For crying out loud, it made more sense when Garfield learned how to fly a plane because they found an air traffic controller that compared the instruments to pasta. At least they didn't make the cat Sebastian act like Scooby. Oh, no, 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 no. He's a ripoff of Muttley.
Look at that Josie. She gets to be Alan's nurse, and I get stuck watching the door.
At least Hannah is equal opportunity in ripping off their cartoons. So anyway, the first episode has them crash landing on a distant planet and soon finding that Josie has been kidnapped and replaced by a robot clone. This leads them to an alien civilization where the former despot is looking to regain power by replacing the new leaders with robot clones. Are we sure the Fonz and the Happy Days gang was Hannah's first attempt to rip off Doctor Who? So I'm sure you can guess the basis of each episode, as again, like almost all cartoons of the time, they're interchangeable. The band is trying to find their way back to Earth, some mishap causes them to land on another strange world, and they find themselves in some perilous situation before everything is resolved, and they take off in the rocket again for lather, rinse, repeat. It's the classic Lost in Space story format we've seen so many times, but for what it's worth, this was one of the first such shows, especially among cartoons, so I can cut them some slack in that area. Which brings me to the other thing I amazingly have to cut them some slack on. The actual episode stories are not really that bad. They're pretty much the types of stories you would expect to see in a space adventure series, encountering all different types of strange planets and alien life forms.
Find Queen Felina and bring her back to us.
But we don't know anything about Menton and the city of Labor.
Menton is a super robot that we built. He somehow programmed himself for conquest.
We didn't take your old Robotron. We don't even know what it is.
It is our scientific space bank, a computerized electric brain that stores all our advanced scientific knowledge.
If that knowledge falls into the wrong hands, the possessor could rule this entire galaxy.
Hell, they did the World of the Amazon Women episode 30 years before Futurama did it, with a lot less snoo-snoo, of course. So in that case, this isn't necessarily a bad show, it's just a baffling one. Part of me can kind of understand why Hanna-Barbera would want to turn the first Josie and the Pussycats cartoon into a mystery crime-fighting action show. This was probably more than just duplicating the successful formula of Scooby-Doo. I wouldn't be surprised if Bill and Joe were also taking inspiration from the Monkees. a band created not just to piggyback the popularity of the Beatles, but also specifically to be television characters in an action-adventure series. In fact, Scooby-Doo Where Are You was originally supposed to be a Monkees knockoff called Mysteries 5. I can also understand that HB might get inspiration from shows like Star Trek and Lost in Space to create a space adventure cartoon. But why merge these two together? What purpose does it serve to put these specific characters into this specific setting? I get you may have thought that name recognition might sell more than creating original characters, but no one stepped in to suggest that this concept might make people think that certain people in the company might be on certain illicit substances. In fact, putting these characters into such a setting is what pretty much forced in the one aspect of the show that didn't make a lot of sense. The musical numbers. That's right. We didn't just have songs from the titular band playing during parts like chase scenes in pretty much every episode. Most of the time, we had to have a scene where the band was performing in the episode itself.
Hey, did you have yourself a day? Hey, did you live it all the way? Get a moving. Come on faster. Now let's dance the frames away.
What the frack? Are Josie and the Pussycats trying to be the Wild Stallions and bring universal peace through rock music or something? Whether or not this all contributed to the sequel not being more successful than the original, we may never know. The show did not get a second season, with CBS not asking for any more Josie cartoons afterward, and naturally the series ended with no one finding out just how the Pussycats got back to Earth. Of course, that's even assuming this series is considered canon within the Josie or Archie franchises. I don't know if Josie and her friends' adventures in space were ever discussed in the main Archie comics in the years after, but I do know that an actual Josie and the Pussycats in Space comic series was made in 2019. The worst part is that still makes more sense than when they made a comic adaptation of Galactica 1980. This show was such a disappointment in that it could have been so much better had it not had these characters. The stories could actually be creative and downright compelling, but they get held back by just constantly having to ask what sense it makes to put a teen rock band in this setting. And that could be said for all of the other shows that took licensed characters and put them in a sci-fi setting that made no sense for them. Even crazier is that in the years that followed, there were cartoons that got it right. There was, of course, the animated Star Trek series at first, but then came the likes of completely original shows with sci-fi fantasy elements, such as He-Man, Thundar the Barbarian, and Brave Star. Maybe not all of those had any long-term success, but as the years have gone on, they at least have a cult following and get some respect for creativity. While shows like Josie and the Pussycats in Outer Space get relegated to a what the hell were they thinking joke by those who occasionally remember that they even existed. Hey, Chief! We could probably use your help developing this brand new cartoon series we thought up! What new cartoon series? The Big Bang Theory in 1 million BC! I've gotta be able to get these guys out of the house again!